Welcome to Are You Ready? With your Bible teacher, Carlos Crillo. Get ready to study your Bible.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Are You Ready? I pray you're having a very blessed evening. We are very blessed this evening once again to have a very, very special guest. Before I make an introduction to our guest, I want to please, for those who are going to be watching this program, Are You Ready Tonight? Please take as many notes. If you have any questions, let us know. And we are excited, but we are living in perilous times. And I think our guest tonight is going to give us a lot of great information. So pay attention, open your ears, get some discernment in what you're going to hear tonight. So like I said, we're very blessed. And so if you've never subscribed, please subscribe to Are You Ready? Click notification, thumbs up, and share this video with as many people as possible. Tonight, we have with us Dr. David PYNE, who has a great deal of knowledge about nuclear forces, EMP. But before we get started with so many questions we have, I want to give an opportunity for Dr. PYNE to introduce himself to us here on the Are You Ready audience. Dr. PYNE, thank you again for being with us.
Thank you for having me again. It's a pleasure to be here. So, I am currently serving as the Deputy Director of National Operations for the Task Force on National Homeland Security. I've also served on the U.S. Army Headquarters staff with responsibility for armaments cooperation with the former Soviet Union, the Middle East, Latin America, and Africa, as well as as North America. And as you said, I'm focused on threats to the U.S. In terms of national security, but also in real world solutions, specifically in conflict resolution in Ukraine and also on the Taiwan issue.
Wow, and that's some of the stuff we're going to talk about tonight. Well, let's get started. Here we go. There's so much. I like the book of Esther, where it says, "For such a time as this," and I think this is one of those moments. Can you explain just a little bit? Last time when we spoke, we concentrated on Ukraine and Russia. Can you let us know a little bit of what's happening in the Middle East? Can you, we know Israel, Hamas, and is it building up to something bigger? What do you think?
Well, of course, the rumors are true. This is an Iranian proxy war against the state of Israel. Iran, of course, has been a mortal enemy of Israel since the Islamists took control with the Ayatollah Khomeini in 1979. They typically refer to the U.S. as the Great Satan and Israel to the Little Satan. But of course, Israel is a nuclear power. It's the fourth largest nuclear power in the world. And Iran knows that. And so that's why Iran is not waging a direct war against Israel, but rather a proxy war through Hamas and Hezbollah terrorists. Currently, the Hamas war, obviously, that was supercharged on October 7th when Hamas staged cross-border raids, kidnapped about 250 civilians, including mostly Israelis, but also some about 10 to 20 Americans, killed about 1,400 Israelis. And that essentially, the purpose of that attack, from my standpoint, was most likely because Iran was trying to derail the Saudi Arabia-Israel peace agreement, in which Biden was threatening to share nuclear technology with the Saudis, but also really to undermine Iran's premier position as kind of almost the de facto regional hegemon over the Persian Gulf region. So that was, Iran considered that a mortal threat, and they responded with these attacks, which have since accomplished their purpose. I think the chances of, at least in the near future, I think the chances of an Iran-Saudi Arabia peace agreement decrease with every day that Israel continues its invasion of the Gaza Strip.
Okay. Now, could you explain, the connection you mentioned, Iran connected to How about Hezbollah in Lebanon? That they are also connected to Iran. Is that correct?
Yeah, Iran is, or Hezbollah is really Iran's really premier proxy force. They have their own army. It consists of about 100,000 Hezbollah fighters and militants in Lebanon. They're organized by brigades, so they really do have kind of a traditional army structure in a very real way. They're kind of a parallel military force with the Lebanese army, perhaps even stronger militarily. And they're estimated to have about 130 to 130,000, 150,000 rockets and missiles, which are more advanced than what the Hamas terrorists used against Israel on October 7th. So they really have the potential of deluging and overwhelming the Israeli missile defenses, and perhaps even devastating the Israeli capital of Tel Aviv as well.
Hmm. Now, do you believe that Hezbollah will attack? I mean, they've been doing it off and on, sending missiles. Do you think they'll go with these 100,000? Do you think they'll just come in from Lebanon into northern Israel? Is there a possibility of that?
There's certainly a possibility of that. I think I actually am just finished polishing up an article about that. How if Biden decides to defend Taiwan militarily, it's going to kickstart multiple wars. It will be at war with four nuclear power enemies. North Korea will invade South Korea. Russia would likely make a move against NATO in the Baltics, and a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Not this limited kind of Vietnam-style war it's been waging against Ukraine over the last 20 months. And then Iran would most likely occupy much of Iraq, which is essentially an Iranian proxy. And probably send large numbers of troops into Syria and perhaps even Lebanon as well. So I think it's unlikely that Hezbollah will go for a full-scale attack on Israel unless the U.S. is in a war somewhere else, or even more likely if we get cyber attacked massively, where the U.S. has kind of been taken off the geopolitical chessboard. In other circumstances, I think it's unlikely that we'll see a massive Hezbollah attacks against Israel.
Okay, so you don't think the Hezbollah will do that? But you mentioned simultaneous, and I've been thinking in my prayer time that something like that could possibly happen. Isn't it possible? Because it's like we're trying to be everywhere at the same time. You mentioned Taiwan.
It's very possible. America is a republic, but it's also an empire, and empires tend to be very militaristic. They're always trying to, expand the borders of the empire. We've certainly been doing that, most notably in Ukraine. That sparked a large-scale war such as we haven't seen since World War II. When the U.S. sends its troops to the borders of Russia and China, that's really sets up, potential powder kegs, ticking time bombs, as in the case of Taiwan, where we actually only have 200 troops, but where Biden has stated repeatedly that we will defend Taiwan militarily. So that's really Taiwan. I think is the most likely place that World War III will break out. Back before World War II, everyone pointed to the Polish Quarter as the most likely. All the great military strategists knew that was where any war with Germany would break out. And it couldn't be any more obvious that a major war is set to break out over Taiwan unless we get some common sense in the Biden administration, and they provide the strategic clarity that we need to survive the next decade, which is to say that we will not defend Taiwan militarily. But then we will defend all of our treaty allies in the Pacific instead. Yeah.
So you mentioned that what you're saying is that the U.S. shouldn't go in because we get into a mess. So we would just some people would say, well, just let China go in and take over Taiwan, per se. Would you say that instead of us getting in there and something really big happening?
Yeah,
Or
I would say that Taiwan is an unwinnable war. You know, I watched a recent debate at
Mhm.
Colorado Christian University. It was very good. Recommended to your viewers. And that was just a couple nights ago. And essentially, there were two sides. One was the neocon side saying we should defend Taiwan no matter what, militarily against China, even if it risks World War III or nuclear escalation.
Mm.
And the other one was, I think it was William Ruger, if I'm not mistaken, and he essentially argued that we should do what was in the U.S. national interest, and he countered the idea that we could even win a war against China or Taiwan at all, given China is, as President Trump wisely stated, is 100 miles away from China, but he said. 8,000 miles away from the U.S. It's actually 6,900 miles from the U.S. So they really have a huge home field advantage, and it's almost the Cuban Missile Crisis in reverse. Cuba is located 90 miles away from the U.S., which is roughly the same distance as Taiwan is located from China, and we can, if an enemy power attempted to, prevent us from taking Cuba, I think we could overwhelm them, and that's certainly the case, even more so in China. China's been spending the last 3 decades building up a world-class military, massive, superiority in terms of ballistic missiles, the largest nuclear-capable ballistic missile force in the world, the largest navy in the world, the largest coast guard in the world, and the largest army in the world. And they have theater nuclear supremacy over the U.S. in the region. We don't have any nukes stationed there in terms of theater nukes. We do have, of course, strategic nuclear missile submarines, 2 of them that are deployed in the Pacific at any given time. But that's not really optimized to be able to fight or deter Chinese invasion of Taiwan.
So I don't know if you heard, it just happened either yesterday, that there was one of their aircraft carriers, the Shanlang, moved went to the median line. I don't know if you heard that. It just happened. I think it was today or yesterday that they went in. So, do you think it looks like? You think that the Chinese are about to? Are they very close to taking over Taiwan?
They are now. I should say that China would much prefer to have a peaceful reunification agreement with Taiwan. They might even settle for something a little less than what they want in terms of full control of Taiwan,
Okay.
along the lines that I preferred, with a kind of a EU-style confederation agreement, which Taiwan retains control of its military as a hedge against a full Chinese takeover. But other than that, that seems pretty unlikely that we're going to negotiate some kind of reunification agreement with China over Taiwan. And so we are most likely to see a Chinese invasion, most likely beginning with the blockade, perhaps massive air and missile strikes, and certainly a massive cyber attack against Taiwan, which would really, could paralyze, almost decapitate in a way the Chinese government and Chinese military, kind of presenting the U.S. with a fait accompli, where the U.S. is unable to resupply Taiwan with food, fuel, and arms and ammo without provoking a direct clash with the PLA Navy.
So at that point, the Chinese will probably just land troops on the island. Isn't that after the blockade? At some point.
Yeah, I mean, there's really two major possibilities. The joint air and naval blockade strategy is something that can be pursued almost on its own as a way to get Taiwan to surrender, likely capitulate within a few months. They only have about 90 day, spare food supply, probably less for fuel. But really, if the Chinese were engaged in a cyber attack against Taiwan, which they could do quite easily, and shut down the large Chinese transformers in Taiwan's critical infrastructure with simply a satellite signal. Then I think I think Taiwan could be made to, really pressured to surrender even perhaps earlier than 90 days. And it would really kind of move the decision over to, the U.S. whether we really wanted to fight World War III and risk the deaths of 275 million Americans to fight an unwinnable war to defend Taiwan from China, when we really lack the military assets to do so, unlike as was the case about even 25 years ago.
So the idea of the U.S. going in, and it doesn't look good for them to do that kind of idea. If China goes in and blockades and they start bombing, the only thing the U.S. will do is just say we're against what you're doing. Please stop. We're going to. But this is what I'm saying. If we do that, if we start doing sanctions on China, it's going to affect the U.S. economy very quickly, correct?
Yeah, and that would be my recommended approach, is that we wage economic rather than military war against China in response to their invasion of Taiwan. Certainly, that would, even if we don't fight China directly in a war, we are going to have likely those massive economic sanctions that we levy against them, and then they'll do the same thing back to us. And unlike as was the case in Russia, where we weren't dependent on Russia's, the Russian economy at all in terms of, our economy, the U.S. is currently heavily dependent on our number one enemy, geopolitical foe, Communist China, for sustaining our way of life. And so that's going to be a massive economic shock, but it's one that we need to do in order to become independent of China. The problem is, many of our weapon systems, require components that we currently buy from China. So we're actually, if China were to cut off those supplies, which they absolutely would, from the moment we levy major sanctions against them over, a blockade or invasion of Taiwan, our ability to produce our own weapons is going to substantially decrease.
Very quickly, very quickly. If I could go back we're going to go back and forth to Iran. I don't know if you heard about the resolution 559. The House, I think the Senate, and it went and it was passed in the House, was supposed to go to the Senate, about no nuclear Iran. But if I remember correctly, Dr. Peter Vincent Pry, and you have also stated that Iran already has a nuclear bomb. So when you hear resolutions saying we're going to do, it's not acceptable that Iran can have a nuclear bomb, but they probably already have nuclear bomb. Am I correct?
Yeah, Trump, when he was president, he even made a statement that was very telling along those lines. He stated that we wouldn't allow Iran to develop any additional nuclear bombs, is essentially what he said. It's not a direct quote. But there's multiple, sources from the CIA. Former CIA director James Woolsey has assessed that Iran has nuclear missiles. Dr. Peter Pry, and there's one other major national security expert or former U.S. official that does as well. And essentially what Dr. Pry stated is that, as of 2003, Iran was, so advanced in their nuclear development program, they were within, the U.S. at the same point was within 3 months of exploding our first atomic bomb. And that was 20 years ago.
Right.
According to U.S. intelligence, which, is consistent about one thing, and that is getting things wrong, 90% of the time. They've stated that Iran abandoned its nuclear program back in 2003. But the reason, if that's at all true, the reason is they abandoned it is because they already had nukes. They didn't need to develop it anymore. So they're likely, producing nukes. We don't know what the size of their nuclear arsenal is. Obviously, there's no transparency. It could be 6, it could be 60, but they've had a lot of time to build these, and they've done so, I believe, in conjunction with North Korea, which they have a very close relationship with in terms of nuclear testing, as well as ballistic missile technology sharing. A lot of the Iranian ballistic missile designs are almost carbon copies of North Korea's.
Knowing that they do have, and they come out with this resolution, would the U.S. all these there's now 2 aircraft carriers in the Mediterranean. They got ships in the Red Sea. Do you think would the U.S. think about a preemptive surprise attack on Iran? Is that a possibility?
Not under the Biden administration. The Biden administration is the most pro-Iranian, presidency we've seen, I think, in our lifetimes, and that's that's a good and a bad thing. It's mainly a very bad thing because they're a terrorist enemy. But on the good side, if there was a neoconservative, like for example Tim Scott, who in the Republican presidential candidate last night said that we should bomb Iran immediately. That really could start World War III because Iran likely has super EMP weapons. They likely have at least one or maybe more ICBM. They likely might not be able to fire an ICBM against the U.S., but they do have super EMP satellites, most likely, because they've been testing them since 2020. And in fact, it was only 9 days before the Hamas attacks against Israel that they launched their second super EMP satellite that's orbiting over the U.S. at about 280 miles, which is the optimum EMP attack altitude for a super EMP satellite.
So what you're saying is that Iran, at this moment, this time, has a satellite that passes over the United States that could do an EMP. What would be the difference between the satellite doing it or a nuclear bomb exploding over?
So the difference, and by the way, North Korea has those EMP satellites as well, is that there wouldn't be any, with a missile launch, you can track the missile contrail, where it launches, you can pinpoint exactly where it's coming from, what country is attacking you, except of course in the case of third-party attacks or ship-based attacks where it's perhaps a cargo freighter or something like that, a container ship. Whereas with a super EMP satellite, they would, instead of half an hour warning, as would be the case from a launch from Iran or North Korea, the warning time would be zero. It would be North Korea or Iran pressing a button and detonating it, the satellite over the U.S. And that would be a devastating attack. Even one super EMP satellite at that altitude with the super EMP warhead could devastate the entire U.S. and potentially kill up to 275 million Americans over the course of a year. So that's why it's really critical that we stay out of any direct war with Iran, North Korea, Russia, or China, because they all have that capability. And U.S. leaders, sadly, are mostly unaware of this devastating capability that they have.
Can you repeat that part? You said that are you saying people within the government don't know what you just said?
I'm saying that while U.S. leaders believe, or they know that Russia and China have the capability in terms of super EMP attack, they're much less aware about North Korea and Iran. And even though they are loosely aware of the EMP threat, I don't think they understand how devastating it truly would be.
Wow. I mean, and I think what you just said, the majority of Americans have no idea. See, I think a lot of Americans think that Iran is so backward. These guys, so they got a few weapons. There's no way they could be that advanced with us. There's no way they could have that technology. That could never happen. That's what a lot of people here do believe that. Okay, we talked about that. Okay, all right. Okay, now a question, because I did hear that China has 6 warships. The last time, I don't know if they're still there. I know they have a naval base in a place called Djibouti.
Hmm.
in Africa, and and I heard that they had 6 warships near the Mediterranean,
Persian Gulf.
Persian Gulf. Excuse me,
Yeah.
Persian Gulf. Do you think that is China just doing that for show, or do hey we're here, or do you think they would ever attempt to do anything, get involved like Russia would try to do so?
Yeah. So there's two forces here. Of course, the U.S. and China are the with Russia. The three top superpowers.
Hmm.
And the purpose of the U.S. Naval forces in the region is to deter Iran from attacking Israel.
Right.
But the purpose of the Chinese naval forces is to deter the U.S. from attacking Iran. And
Mm.
unlike whereas U.S. naval forces are surface ships and our nuclear powered attack submarines do not have any nuclear warheads on them and haven't since 1991.
Right.
The Russian and the Chinese ships in the Persian Gulf are equipped with nuclear weapons. So,
Really?
they're in a position to nuke one of our allies. They can't they can't nuke the U.S. From the Persian Gulf unless they were to have nuclear missile submarine, which they likely don't have one there. But they could take out Israel if they wanted to. So. That's another reason in the mix that we don't want the war to escalate to a regional war with Iran, and certainly not a world war with Russia and China involved as well.
Okay, so let me see if I heard you right. You're saying those warships that were in the Persian Gulf have nuclear weapons possibly on them?
Yeah, so China doesn't have any. They don't abide by any arms control treaties. They haven't really announced any unilateral disarmament or measures. To reduce the nuclear threat posture as we have, obviously in 1991 when Bush decided to essentially denuclearize the entire U.S. Navy aside from our nuclear ballistic missile submarines. They haven't done anything like that, and so it's pretty much guaranteed that they at least one or perhaps even all of those naval vessels in the Persian Gulf are armed with nuclear weapons. I would assess that every major Chinese large surface combatant, such as a destroyer, frigate, or cruiser, and perhaps even some corvettes, are armed with nuclear weapons.
Wow, that's news to me. I didn't know. I was thinking about the submarines, but I didn't think that the warships and the frigates could possibly have nuclear because they don't follow any. You mentioned any treaties, but I just heard talking about treaties that we just left one and the Russians left another one. The same one. Is that the Nuclear Armed Forces Treaty? Is that correct? They just
So
did.
the U.S. hasn't left any arms control treaties since Trump pulled out of the INF treaty in 2019.
Okay.
On the other hand, the Russians have left three separate treaties since the war in Ukraine began.
Okay.
The first one being the New START treaty, which they suspended, I think, formally suspended in February or March of this year. They've also pulled out of the nuclear test ban, which is the underground nuclear test ban. So they have no restriction on testing underground nukes, which they're likely to do at their nuclear test site in the Arctic very soon. And then, of course, the Conventional Forces in Europe Treaty, which they had really suspended that long ago, and they formally left the treaty just within the last week or two.
That's what I meant, the Conventional Forces Treaty. Okay. So now that something just came to my mind about when you start doing that, that means you begin to trust the other side less and less? Is that because if we both the treaties were to just keep an eye, okay, you're doing this, you're not supposed to do this, but if you start getting out of it, all of them, then you don't really are trusting neither one side, correct?
So I maybe I'm a contrarian, but I've never placed much faith in nuclear arms control treaties. I think Russia's record of Russia has a half decent record of keeping many of their treaties, but in terms of nuclear arms control, they have pretty much a 0% record of keeping them. They've violated every single one. So there's really no point in having any nuclear arms control treaties with Russia, unless, of course, we were to strategically partner with them, and then they would view us as a trustworthy partner, and we could probably do the same, because they do what's in their best interest. And if they view us as a threat, then they're going to violate those treaties. If they view us as a friend or a partner, then I think they would not be incentivized to do so. But I wouldn't say that it's made the world more dangerous. I think that Russia's been breaking out of this New START treaty for many years now, and this simply formalizes it. And honestly, it should serve as a wake-up call to U.S. leaders to drop the illusion that they're abiding by any of these arms control treaties, especially New START, which was, as Trump stated, was really a terrible treaty that Obama signed back in 2011.
Yeah, that's what I heard. That one wasn't any good. So when it comes to the possibility, because all these things that are happening, when people begin to say words, threats are coming from Russia and from the Iran, from the U.S. Do you think these are just words that people are saying, or is there people behind the scenes say, hey, we could possibly win this thing if we do it right? What do you think? Is there somebody pulling the strings behind this thing thinking, hey, you never know, we might win?
Well, I think with Russia, certainly Russia has always believed it could fight and win a nuclear war. Certainly since the 60s, that's been part of their military doctrine and philosophy, both for Russian military and political leaders, including President Putin. With China, I think that's also been a view, but it's one that really hasn't had much sway until recently, when they exceeded the U.S. in terms of the size of their nuclear arsenal. And really are on track to build a nuclear arsenal that's essentially 3 times larger than ours, with the U.S. Really not doing much about it or to try to catch up, with no real plans to produce any additional strategic nuclear warheads, but merely to modernize the launch systems and delivery systems that we've neglected over the last 3 to 5 decades. So in terms of the U.S., I don't think there's really any U.S. leaders, certainly not in the Biden administration, that believe that World War III can be fought and won with Russia or China, at least that I'm aware of. But you're absolutely right. Biden administration, or President Biden, is obviously, he's not playing with a full deck of cards mentally. He doesn't have the cognitive ability to lead the country, let alone put 2 complete sentences together at times. So, it's certainly possible that there's someone pulling his strings. And the very fact that he's declared 4 times that the U.S. is obligated to defend Taiwan militarily against China shows that he really has a dangerous way of thinking, because it's his own communications team that has refuted that every single time. And he's not once has he pulled back from that statement in terms of saying that we would go to war with China over Taiwan.
Right. So, that none of these things are, and people started talking, well, we're going to have a war with China, war with Russia. Any war with either one of them isn't going to end good. Am I correct? The idea of having a war with Russia and China?
My assessment is that we were fighting a war with Russia or China, most likely both, we would lose. And that's mainly just due to the fact that, we have unilaterally disarmed ourselves of over 90% of our nuclear arsenal that won the Cold War against the Soviet Union, while Russia and China have been building up theirs, at record pace. So, when it's funny to hear that, talk of a new arms race when Russia and China and North Korea have all been racing the last 2 decades, and the U.S. hasn't joined the race. So there's really no arms race if the U.S. isn't building anything new, or in terms of increasing the size of our strategic nuclear arsenal, which is the most important component of our nuclear deterrent.
Right. So, and not to repeat so much, so the chances of let me ask you this way: would having a Republican president versus Democrat, would that affect a decision on going to war with these countries, or would they both do the same?
So it's interesting. Like a lot of people have said that Putin wouldn't have invaded Ukraine during the Trump presidency if Trump was still president, and that's absolutely true. But the reason isn't because he feared Trump; it's quite the opposite. It's because he didn't fear Trump. He viewed Trump as consistently, supportive of peace with Russia. He knew that Trump had been elected on a platform of comprehensive peace agreement with the Russian Federation.
Mm-hmm.
And he knew that Trump wanted to pull out of NATO. So this whole war over Ukraine has been kind of a manufactured war by the Biden regime,
Yes.
in which they refused Russia's demand to guarantee that Ukraine would never join NATO. That's really kind of the key. And so, for at least as far as Russia is concerned, so right now, currently we have the two main candidates, Trump and DeSantis, both stating that they would not, they would end the war in Ukraine, and essentially as soon as they became president, they would cut off all aid to Ukraine to incentivize that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly what we need to do. It's something I've been
Yeah.
advocating for. Since March of 2022, when I gave my first peace proposal, and have done a few since. So with regards to Taiwan, I think it's not really. I don't think it's a question so much of party. There are certain Republicans that are as foolish as Biden. Certainly Nikki Haley, Tim Scott, Chris Christie. Those are all Republicans. Mike Pence, of course, who's left the race, the presidential primary race. All of those Republicans would be as, or at least as likely as Biden getting us into war with China. Whereas Trump, I think, would be less likely to defend Taiwan militarily if he wasn't presented with the fait accompli where the U.S. or the China engaged in preemptive strikes against U.S. military bases or the homeland itself. DeSantis and Vivek, I'm not so sure. I think, and I know that Vivek he would absolutely prefer to avoid war with China. But I'm not convinced that China would not invade Taiwan under his presidency.
Okay. You mentioned Ukraine. We can shift to that before we finish the program tonight. For me, it's a sad because so many thousands of Ukrainian soldiers have died, and this almost going on 2 years. And it's something that I really believe should never even happen if we had just sat down and talked. But it looks like the party's over for Mr. Zelensky. That's what I'm beginning to see. That what I was reading, that the situation with him and the U.S. is trying to start pulling a little bit away from him. And do you think, because I think, will he stay there into 2024? Some people are talking about coup d'etat, or something may happen because it's just many people in Ukraine just want some sort of peace agreement with Russia and end it. What do you think?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think, and I've been predicting this for a while as well, is that, at some point, the U.S. would have to put its own national security interests first. I mean, there were reports at the beginning of the year that the Biden administration had offered to allow Putin to keep all of the areas of Ukraine he'd annexed in September 2022, which amounted to 18 to 20% of Ukraine's internationally recognized territory. But that proposal was rejected. It was vetoed by Zelensky and reportedly by Russia as well, which, of course, required, you can't end a war unless both sides agree to end it. So, but also I think Biden refused to give up his Ukraine and NATO fantasy, which, is really at the core of any peace agreement that's going to be workable and, in terms of a just and lasting peace, because, of course, if that's not a concession we give up, or we demand that Russia give up some of its annexed territories, then Russia is just going to come back another year or two and invade again. Because that's why I think it's really ridiculous when the neoconservatives say that we need to help Ukraine liberate all of Russian annexed territory, because they lack the capability to do that. In fact, during the last 5 months of the Ukrainian counteroffensive, began in June 4th. They were able to liberate less than 0.25% of all Russian annexed territory. So, and that was at the cost of, by some reports, 80,000 Ukrainian war dead. So that's Russia has been, their military casualties have never been lower since the war began, because all they're doing is essentially, letting Ukrainian troops commit suicide, marching up against fortified Russian defense lines.
Exactly, and it's like I keep hearing this, and I say, why doesn't this just end? This doesn't need to continue. And do you think, you said, is Zelensky the issue, or is Mr. Biden the issue of continuing this and saying, okay, listen, we're going to call Russia. We're going to, this is it. We have had enough. Enough is enough. We need to sit down, meet somewhere in Paris, I don't know, somewhere, have some agreement, start negotiating to end it. So who's more pulling one to the other? Who wants to end it sooner? What do you think?
Well, I think that President Biden essentially, he subcontracted U.S. security policy in terms of Russia and Russia to Zelensky. So Zelensky's kind of had all the power. So long as we keep giving him more and more weapons and these vast aid packages, where Biden wants to give him $61.4 billion at one time, then he's going to continue doing whatever he wants. He's going to be, trying to start World War III, because really that's his objective. His admitted objective is to embroil the U.S. and NATO in a direct war against Russia, because he knows that's the only possible way and possible hope that he has of liberating the Russian annexed territories. But what he doesn't realize is that, Putin and Russia are very serious in having nuclear red lines over Crimea in particular, but also likely over other annexed territories as well. If Ukraine were to break through and capture Mariupol, for example, that would cross a Russian nuclear red line in terms of, breaking Russia's land bridge that they fought for and achieved, which is one of their, main goals in the war, to link up Crimea with the rest of the Russian Federation. So I think it's very dangerous, but I think Zelensky at this point is the main obstacle to peace. He's even his own generals are calling him delusional.
Yes.
So there's a clear rift that's opening up between Zelensky and his military leadership, and he recently fired one of his military leaders, most likely for talking back to him and telling him that he's got to get a sense of reality and end this war. So he stopped sacrificing hundreds of thousands of brave Ukrainian soldiers needlessly. But then, of course, Biden is the second most main culprit to blame. Putin, of course, has been doing the killing of the Ukrainians, but he's actually been trying to stop the killing since at least March 2022 with that interim peace agreement that was reported by Fiona Hill, who was a strong supporter of the Ukraine war. So obviously, she's a credible source.
Okay, and so do you see anything coming in the next month before the end of the year? Do you think that this thing could end and we come to some sort of agreement before the end of the year, or is this going to continue into 2024? What do you think?
So the latest reports that I've seen, President Biden may be considering, trying to pressure Zelensky to have elections, but then trying to support one of his opponents to try to oust him from power, because he's so obstinate and he's so unwilling to compromise or try to have peace with Russia. He's heavily invested, in terms of he's incentivized to continue the war, because the longer he continues the war, the longer he gets to have dictatorial powers in Ukraine and crush, kill and imprison his political opponents with impunity. So, and not only that, but in terms of the the elections, which he's said he was suspending indefinitely until the war ended. So, there's no
Oh,
chance of him losing power outside of a coup unless he holds an election and loses. So, I do think the Biden administration will be very smart to force him, try to pressure him into holding, a democratic election to try to bring some, elect a more sensible Ukrainian leader who supports peace.
right. Because if not, this thing will continue. Do you think we're almost finished? Do you think because this is what the rumors I've been hearing. Well, you think the Russians with Putin will go into the Baltics? You think he would attempt to do something like that?
So I think there's no chance of Russia invading a NATO member state
Okay.
unless he's provoked to do so, and that would require something like a no-fly zone, sending NATO troops to fight Russia directly in Ukraine, or a war between the U.S. and China, in which he might feel obligated by virtue of his military alliance treaty with China to kind of open up a second front against the U.S. and its allies. So I do think that's a very strong possibility for Russia to invade the Baltics if Biden decides to fight a war with China, and that's something I'm going to be writing about and hopefully publishing an article about this weekend.
Uh, who do you think within his administration is leaning towards something like that? With
Yeah, so Putin, of course, is a member of what is the Russians refer to as the Siloviki. And those are essentially former KGB officials. And Petruchev is kind of his number one deputy who would be likely to succeed him in the event he were to die or natural causes or even be assassinated, I guess. Which the chances of that are pretty much zero. And Petrushin is considered more of a hardliner. Then you have, of course, Dmitry Medvedev, who's
never.
the former Russian president. He talks about nuking NATO all the time, nuking Ukraine. So he's definitely more of a hardliner than Putin. So, a lot of people, Biden himself has said that, Putin must not be allowed to stay in power. He's on record stating that he supports Putin's overthrow and a coup and being tried on war crimes. People need to be careful what they wish for, because Putin is kind of the one strong man that's kind of preventing the hardliners from nuking Ukraine and fighting a direct war with NATO, in which the U.S. and NATO would likely lose badly, and tens, if not hundreds of billions of Americans and Europeans would die. So, I've actually been quite surprised and shocked that Putin has been so restrained and not responding in kind to U.S.-sponsored cyber and sabotage attacks, obviously against Nord Stream, blowing up various targets within Russia itself, including Ukrainian attacks on Russian nuclear bases. So one can only hope. I wouldn't go so far to say that I pray that Putin lives a long life, but that's certainly preferable to the alternative.
Yeah, because the other ones are thinking, send the nukes and send them now. Gonna the other guys behind. But how about here? You mentioned Russia. Well, who do you think on the U.S. side, the Biden administration, is his advisors, people behind him, are leaning in that direction of going to war?
So I don't know of anyone in the Biden administration who's an advocate of direct war with Russia. Obviously, I think there are advocates of direct war with China, which is kind of ironic because the Biden national security wing of the administration is staffed by a lot of kind of Chinese folks that were in bed with China, kind of like him in terms of business and otherwise, with Beijing-funded think tanks and aligned think tanks. So. I think we'll just have to see. But I'm grateful that the one good thing that Biden did with Russia, the Ukraine conflict, is he declared before the war started that the U.S. would absolutely not send troops to defend Ukraine militarily. So all he needs to do to avoid war with China, to avoid a preemptive strike on the U.S. and U.S. military bases in the Pacific, would be to state that same thing with China, that the U.S. would not defend Taiwan militarily. And that would force, Taiwan to negotiate a reunification agreement with China. And the U.S. could be involved in that, and we could, try to mediate the best terms possible. Perhaps even drag that on for a few years if China doesn't accept more reasonable reunification terms along the lines that I've proposed in the Real War newsletter at dpyne.substack.com.
Okay, well, one last question before we finish. Do you think, and then because this is what's happened, news, this happens, that happens, do you think the Middle East with Israel, will that eventually calm down, or will it shift to the Pacific anytime soon, or concentrate just in the Middle East? What do you think?
Yeah, we're facing a situation where we basically have successive wars. First the war in Ukraine, then the war in Israel, and then the war over Taiwan is likely to erupt next year. So that's irregardless of what Israel does in the Middle East in terms of whether it decides to reinvade Lebanon or occupy the Gaza Strip indefinitely, which is something we've been hearing hints of by Prime Minister Netanyahu. So. But I have been quite. I predicted that the war would not escalate to a regional war, that it wouldn't escalate to an interstate war. It would remain essentially an Israeli war on terror, whether Hezbollah entered the war in full force or not. But I've been pleasantly kind of satisfied that my predictions proven true, and Hezbollah really hasn't staged the kind of attacks that we were worried about against Israel. With perhaps 30 rockets versus 30,000.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you. We have been very blessed tonight with Dr. PYNE. Before we finish, Dr. PYNE, is there anything you want people to remember of all that you've spoken out tonight? Anything in your final remarks you want to make?
Yeah, I'd like to thank you again for having me on your show, and I want to encourage all your viewers to please go to dpyne.substack.com and subscribe to my newsletter. It's free to subscribe to unless you want to do the paid option. But there I have a lot of peace proposals and national security updates, and if you if you want to make a difference, you can buy a copy of my book, Catastrophe Now, available on Amazon.com. Just do a search of my name, David PYNE, PYNE, and read some of my solutions and share some of those solutions with your members of Congress to encourage them to support diplomatic options and the war in Ukraine in particular, and avoid war with China over Taiwan, and to rebuild our nuclear forces, the missile defenses, and harden the grid against super EMP attack. And lastly, I want to encourage your viewers also to go to our other website at emptaskforce.us, where you can volunteer to volunteer to serve on one of our state leadership teams, as well as to donate to our nonprofit organization, the Task Force on National Homeland Security. We greatly need your help to fund our efforts to save our country from destruction.
All right. Well, Dr. PYNE, thank you very, very much for being with us once again. And I hope everybody who is watching will be able to share this information. I want to thank everyone, Dr. PYNE, for being with us, and all those who have watched. Please use this info and share it with as many people as possible. Don't forget, please subscribe to Are You Ready? Thumbs up and share this video. Shalom, everybody. Have a blessed evening. Dr. PYNE, have a very blessed evening. And once again, thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.